The Ontario Municipal Board is one of the oldest and most powerful tribunals you may never have heard of in this province. But chances are, if you have heard of it, you have an opinion about this final arbiter of land use planning. The Ontario government has undertaken a review with an eye to reforming the OMB. What should it do? Let's ask. Jane Pepino, she's a partner at Aird & Burles LLP and founder of their Municipal and Land Use Planning Group. Tom Marakis, town councillor in Aurora, just north of Toronto. Mike Collins-Williams is a registered professional planner and director of policy for the Ontario Home Builders Association. And Martin Redcon, Ontario politics columnist at the Toronto Star. And while I am delighted to welcome you all to our little table here at TVO, you're going to forgive me if I do a special welcome for you, okay? Because once upon a time, I think a millennium ago, Jane Pepino was a regular on a program we used to do called Fourth Reading, and you were here every week, and it's so great to see you back in the studio.
Nice to be back.
Which looks a lot different from when you were here.
It does indeed.
Boy, oh boy. Okay, let's get into this about the OMB. Sheldon, please, this fact file if you would. The OMB is an independent, arm's-length tribunal of the Ontario government, traces its history back to 1906. It mostly deals with appeals under the Planning Act. In 2014-15, the OMB had more than 1,500 cases forwarded to it. These cases range from disputes over minor variances on private property to plans to build new subdivisions and condo towers. The Ontario government concluded public consultations on the OMB last December, and legislation to reform the tribunal is expected to be introduced in the spring. Let's get your positions on the record as we start. Councillor, why don't we go to you first?
Sure.
Do we need the OMB?
I'm kind of a yes and a no. In a certain capacity, yes. But as it's currently stated, no.
So keep it, but fix it.
Definitely.
Jane Pepino.
I don't know what this planning process would be able, what it would be or how it would be able to operate without the municipal board. We're in a provincially driven, policy-led system, and someone has to decide what that is.
And the OMB is going to be the decider.
They're the judges, yes.
Gotcha. Mike.
Well, nobody likes change, and planning is all about change. Planning is, for better or for worse, also very political, and the OMB certainly has an important role as an evidence-based tribunal to manage conflict.
Martin.
So it's a good question, but it's a trick question, as you know, because the answer is yes. We need some kind of adjudicating panel, just not this OMB. We need a better OMB that is more responsive, that doesn't try to be unpredictable and the most powerful panel in North America without trying to be more responsive to the facts and not try to take over the powers of elected politicians and local councils and official plans.
Let's follow up on that notion of power. Oh, wow, you started shaking your head even before I got to that. What was that all about?
Well, I was listening. I agreed with about 80% of what was said, but the idea that the municipal board had power that went somehow beyond what was appropriate, proper, or given to it is one I fundamentally disagree with. The municipal board, legislatively and through direction of the courts, is required to apply provincial policy in the public interest. So if that is to be changed in some fashion, I agree with you, there are improvements to be made, there's a lot of streamlining that could happen. The municipal board has been crippled in the last decade and a half. That needs to be fixed.
Crippled, how so?
I remember when the municipal board was treated like a court, which it is. It's an administrative tribunal. And the members were chosen as if they were judges. They were paid as if they were judges. They were given the kind of supports by way of research, writing time, and those sorts of things. And frankly, they were given some respect equivalent to what judges do because their jobs are big. At the moment, however, people apply online to become a member of the municipal board. They're on contract. The first contract is 3 years. You can never serve more than 10. So when you finally figure out what's happening, you may or may not be
you're out the door.
Out the door. And frankly, there is some concern, at least I share, and certain other members of the bar, that because it's a contract, renewable, limited time, there could be political pressure. These people are judges. They should be independent. They base everything on the evidence, and they need to be treated like judges.
Martin, you want to come back at that?
Well, they should be competent, and I'm not persuaded that they all are familiar with, for example, Toronto situations, Toronto circumstances. They shouldn't try to appropriate to themselves the facts and the planning processes that happen at the city level. So we'll get into this later, I'm sure, but instead of being an appeal process, they've become a relitigating process. So they go back to first principles, they hear the facts again, they let developers make new proposals, enhanced proposals. So instead of having an overview and trying to bring in the official plan, the growth plan, and maintain some fidelity to all of that, it almost seems as if, I'm not saying they do this, but it seems as if they're making it up as they're going along.
Let me pull a nugget out of there, and Mike, I want to put this to you, because there is a perception out there, whether you like it or not, that the OMB is very sweet for developers and very much against the interests of local residents. Do you think that's accurate?
I don't think that's accurate. The OMB does make decisions based on evidence, based on provincial policy. We have a provincial policy framework that is based a great deal on intensification and on increased densities. And I'm empathetic to communities and to councils, because those are difficult positions to be put in when change is coming to your community. The province is expected to grow by about 4 million people over the next 25 years. That's about 100,000 people to the city of Toronto and to the Greater Toronto Area, sorry. And those sound just like 100,000 people every year to the Greater Toronto Area. So there's a lot of change coming. It's essentially the equivalent to the population of Montreal coming to the GTA in the next 25 years. And there are conflicts in the planning system. As far as the decision-making process, I think there is a public perception out there that developers win more often than municipalities.
Is that not the case?
That's not the case. There's independent research that's been done by Aaron Moore at the University of Toronto that digs a little deeper into the decision-making process. And rather than just looking at whether municipalities win or whether developers win, the OMB often sides with the professional staff, the professional planning staff at a municipality. So in cases where there's an application and professional staff recommend council to approve that application, and council, for perhaps political reasons, decides not to approve that application, if that goes to the OMB, typically the OMB will listen to the expert testimony of planning staff and approve that. Now, the public perception might be, well, the developer won, the city lost, but if you dig deeper into the facts, it's the testimony of professional planning staff that usually carries the day.
Let me follow that up with the one of us here who's been elected. The perception is that developers win more often than your constituents do. Do you think that's a fair perception?
I do, and I'll explain why. And I realize that the facts do state that it doesn't support that argument. But at the end of the day, I've said this many times: is it really a win for the municipality once it's been appealed, and if the outcome favors the municipality? The point is that it's a loss to the taxpayer, because due to the fact that it should never have been appealed to begin with. If all that the municipal council is doing is upholding their official plan, then there should be nothing to be appealed at that time. And so it's a loss to the taxpayer right from the beginning.
Did I just hear you, though, at the beginning of that answer say, yes, I acknowledge he's right on the facts, but if he's right on the facts, why is there a but? Isn't that the end of the story?
Well, we are in a world of alternative facts.
No, we're not. No. Actually, we're fighting that as hard as we can here.
For sure. No,
we're in a world of real facts here. No. And if the fact is that developers don't win more than citizens do, why is that perception out there?
Well, it goes back to my main points that we shouldn't be being sent to the OMB to begin with. If all we're doing as elected officials is upholding our official plan and looking at what's best for our community and what's going to better our community, that should not be allowed to be appealed and be sent and have taxpayers waste untold amounts of money fighting a futile fight that at the end of the day is not going anywhere.
I'd like to understand whether that position extends to appeals by citizens against decisions of council. Are you saying that they too should not have the right to appeal to the municipal board?
In my belief, and many municipalities and many elected officials' belief, is the fact that once an official plan has been provincially approved, is that if a council is just upholding that plan, well, then it shouldn't be appealed by any side.
Including your constituents.
Yeah, but
that does happen.
But it does happen now currently, and what we're saying is that's part of the bold reforms that municipalities are looking for change in, is the fact that once that plan is approved overall, it needs to be upheld without the fear of going to the OMB.
Let's go Mike then Martin.
I think the planning system would be better served if more decisions are made locally. Developers don't typically want to go to the OMB because it is an uncertain process and it takes a long time to get a decision made. One of the challenges in our planning system is that a lot of the planning documents, the implementation documents at the local level, are incredibly out of date. We have a provincial policy statement that was updated in the last couple of years. There's a growth plan that was put in place in 2006, and the province is currently updating the growth plan. Yet in the City of Toronto, much of the zoning is 4 decades old. In parts of the city of the former city of North York, they still are using the provisions in the zoning bylaws passed in 1952. So these aren't exactly forward-looking documents at the implementation level, at the local level. And a lot of appeals do occur because the local implementation documents are so out of date. And there's a lot more applications that probably shouldn't even be going to council that should be as of right. I live just off of Danforth Avenue in the Riverside community, and that subway opened 50 years ago, yet the zoning permissions along that subway line are for
Riverdale, you mean?
Yeah, Riverside, just south of Riverdale, just south of Riverdale's Riverside.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
There you go.
There we go.
Neighborhood.
Learn something new every day.
Local
right here.
communities. So it's a challenge that you've got a major piece of infrastructure there that's 50 years old, and it's almost a land use crime when you look at the type of development permissions that are there. And I'm empathetic to the communities, and I'm empathetic to the councillors that when a developer comes forward and has an application that's for 6, 7, 8 stories, you know, the community is up in arms because, well, the zoning says this. But the fact is that zoning's 40, 50 years old and doesn't really reflect the transit-oriented communities we're trying to build.
Let's do Martin, then Tom. Sure.
Can we just back up this tape a little bit? And I want to dissent from all of you. There's 2 sides here, it seems, in the way the table is laid out, but I'm going to dissent from the alternative facts idea. So I think that I've looked at some of that research, and I believe that research is not as clear as you imply. Number one, it's very hard to look at the research because the OMB, being as disorganized as it is, despite its unique powers in North America, it's very hard to actually find, to dig deep into the decisions. There aren't transcripts kept unless a developer pays for the transcripts, and you can't then see the transcript, only the developer gets to keep it. So it's kind of a court, and it's not a court. It's very hard to look at a database
That's not true, or that's not right?
It's what he says is inaccurate.
It's okay. So you think it's an alternative fact, but there isn't the same kind of a database of decisions for the OMB that you'll find that would allow you to make those kinds of assertions, not alternative facts, assertions. Number two, if you look at the big decisions, not the little ones, in the Toronto area, you'll find that 50 to 75% of the decisions do go in the developer's favor. So your argument is, well, they're siding with staff against the big bad politicians who are somehow captive of NIMBYism. But that's a bit of a myth, this NIMBYism myth. It's kind of a side issue. It's a red herring. What's happening is that because the process, there's such high stakes procedures here, and because for developers there's so much money involved, they're not corrupt, they're not buying politicians off, they're not buying off the panelists, but they are so invested in this that they can basically outmuscle and outpower and hire the best lawyers, I'm looking at Jane here, or others, who are so in command of the procedures and the esoterica here that they can just drown out community groups and even city planners who don't have those kinds of resources today.
Okay, Tom.
I just want to go back to what Michael mentioned about the fact that the zoning bylaws and the official plans might be outdated. You know, in Aurora, for example, we're actually currently going through our comprehensive zoning bylaw review. And I specifically asked our director, I said, well, you know, we have these applications coming forward, and they make that same argument that Michael's made, that, you know, they're outdated, and therefore that's why there's so many variances coming forward and amendments being asked for. And I asked, so, well, once we do this update and we bring everything up to current standards, will we have less of these variances coming through? And he said, no, they're always going to ask for more eventually. And so that goes back to my point. Who's better situated to look at what's best for the community and serve the best interests of the community? That's the elected officials that get put there by the residents.
Okay, since you've got the floor, let me follow up on that, because I've also heard it said that while the OMB, the perception may be that they favor developers. On the other hand, elected politicians love the OMB because it's a great bogeyman, right? You can say to your residents, oh my goodness, you know, we fought the good fight, but the reality is the OMB, whereas you know the development is a good idea to begin with. You probably think it's good for the city, but you also know you'll never convince your constituents to put in more intensified development than otherwise, you know, politics would allow for. And so you're happy to allow the OMB to be that bad guy and safety valve at the same time. Any truth in that?
I don't believe there's any truth in it when it comes.
You don't believe there's any truth in that?
Not when it speaks to my council, maybe in some other
Well,
councils.
Aurora
possibly.
accepted, of course, but
sure.
how about anywhere else?
There is I guess I would say there is a perception that some elected officials do play politics, but I think it takes a strong-willed politician, an elected official, to make the proper decisions on what's best for their community. And we were speaking about this outside. Is that the way it's currently situated with the provincial policy statement and everything? Is the province has basically built a one-size-fits-all approach. And we can't have that because each community is different and unique on its own, and that's what we're losing.
I got a chart for that. Should we do this now? Let's bring this chart up here. This is a chart that shows which regions in Ontario give the OMB the most business. And as we can see, I mean, look at the right half of that chart there. You got Toronto, the capital city, with almost 4 out of every 10 cases happening there. And then if you go just outside Toronto, it's 3 out of every 10. And then, of course, in the rest of the province, there's much less business. So, Jane, I wonder, is this really a province-wide issue that we're talking about today, or is this really a Toronto area problem because of the hyper nature of development here?
I think it's probably the latter. And out of the numbers that you see, they haven't sorted out the small things, Committee of Adjustment, minor variance things, from the big matters. And if you start to peel away the small things that in theory could be already hived off to something called local appeal boards, those have been available for a number of years now. The big things are happening here in Toronto, number one. And number two, it's because we have extra layers of policy. As you know, Tom, the growth plan applies. We've got the Greenbelt plan that comes only in the Greater Golden Horseshoe. So there are additional layers of policy that are imposed upon us by the province and that are harder to interpret. And I'd like to go back to Tom's point about if you have an official plan amendment that has been created by, let's call it Aurora, to take the broad policy measures that the province has put out, interpret them in a way that's appropriate for Aurora, as sure as I am sitting here, there will be debates, even once the province, perhaps through the municipal board, has approved that document and said, yes, that meets our needs. There will be debates about the appropriate way of interpreting it. You know, if it says that there's an intensification, well, is that 18 stories or is it 48? So that's where, when the rubber starts to hit the road, where there needs to be some sort of a body to ensure that it's independent, that it's fact-based, that it relies on the experience and expertise of experts in the field, planners, architects, traffic engineers, and the like. And that's where the municipal board, or something very close to it, is invaluable. Because if not, you end up having decisions made in the city of Toronto, for example, where after a 5-minute deputation, limited to 5 minutes, council makes a decision. Or in fact, in fairness, a part of council makes a decision because the city of Toronto has these things called community councils.
Yes.
So if you're in a particular area, you get a part of council that is the only one that hears from an applicant and the community, each limited to 5 minutes. Then they send a recommendation to big council, who's not seen any of the players or read any of the material.
So this is tricky.
It's very tricky.
Martin, can I follow up on, the board's been around for 100 years, more than 100 years. And my understanding of the history was that it was put in place by a far-sighted provincial government a long time ago because there was a lot of corruption on municipal councils back then. And councils would often make bad decisions for bad reasons, and you needed this sort of outside of politics, quasi-judicial tribunal to set things right. Okay, here we are 100 years later. Toronto's a pretty big city. Got a fairly mature, level of political governance. Do we still need that kind of a check on Toronto's decisions?
Yes, and not entirely for the reasons Jane was suggesting. When it was founded, it was the ORMB, the Ontario Railway and Municipal Board. So that's how fossilized, you could argue, this organization is. And they got appointments for life, by the way, which maybe Jane likes because it gives you independence, but sounds like the Senate to me. You have this all-powerful body, and you never have to leave. So look, I'm not going to defend politicians here. That's not the business I'm in. The truth is that there is a nexus of big developers donating money to local politicians. It has been studied. It is a problem. It concerns me, not just at the provincial level, but at the municipal level. So can these politicians be deflected, be influenced? I believe they can. Present company, Aurora, this never happens, I know.
It never happens.
But so that's why, to your trick question at the beginning, yes, we need to have an OMB, but we need an OMB that does the job of appeals rather than trying to supplant municipal councils when they start from scratch. They say, we don't believe that this deputation or this community council and city council did it the right way, so we're going to start over. We're not just going to appeal them on law and process, we're going to look at the facts again. And that's where developers can game the system by holding back. I saw you sigh, but they can hold back and not really put out their full proposal to City Council. They wait a year and a half until they go to the OMB, and then they bring out the big guns and say, hey, here's our other facts, and they can outmuscle and outplan the planners.
Mike, would you acknowledge that happens?
I think most developers work in good faith with the community and with council. Of course, there are some developers that are different than others in terms of their approach. Development does have a knack for getting councillors unelected. Ann Johnson used to be the representative just across the road from this studio, and she lost her seat based over the controversy of a high-rise development right above a subway station right here. So it is...
She lost her seat because two big Minto towers went in right across the road.
Right across the road, right above the subway.
I suspect if you ask, listen, I have no idea, but I bet if you did a poll of the area, 90% of people would say it's better. It's great. The development is good. The amenities it's brought to the area are good. Yep. And she approved it, right? She was on side, and the residents fought her, and she lost her seat.
Yep. It's a challenge. People are afraid of change, and this is why I'm empathetic to councillors in Tom's position, that it's a tough position to be in, because you're elected to represent your local constituents and represent the local interests, whereas planning policy represents the broader public interest, and there is a difference between the local interest and the public interest, and that's where the OMB comes in when there is a problem, when there's a breakdown in the planning process.
Okay, may I just respond?
Please.
I'm sorry, because you didn't have some of your facts right. With respect to what the board gets and what the information is that's placed in front of a council, there has been, 25 years ago, you're quite right, but relatively recent amendments that have been operationalized for the last 6 to 8 years have required something called a complete application. So it is the municipality that gets to decide whether the information that is provided with any application is sufficient for them to review. And if, in fact, there are changes between that complete application, which has to be signed off on by the municipality, and what ends up in front of the Ontario Municipal Board, any municipality can say, that's changed too much, send it back, and there is a provision in the Act that allows the board to send it back for further consideration. So I did want to correct your misapprehension that somehow there could be new things shoved into a file. That's no longer the case.
How about the fact that it's a relatively opaque process? These hearings aren't, they're not televised. Is it still the case transcripts of what is said are not necessarily made public?
No, that's why that's not correct either.
That's not correct.
So
okay.
It is fair to say and accurate to say they are not like courts, they are not transcripts, but if parties request a transcript, then the municipal board requires that it be provided with a copy of whatever transcript, and it forms part of the file which is available.
Who has to pay for it?
Whoever asks for it. It's typically the developer. Sometimes it's the municipality.
Thank you. So I would never say your facts were wrong, but I appreciate the misapprehensions, Jane. Okay. Look, the fact is, though, that when you're doing the research, which was my point, and trying to go back in time and look at these decisions, there are not transcripts available because, for the most part, it was the developer that asked for it, that paid for it, and is not making it available to researchers. So that's why we can't make those assertions that you are putting forward as being the developers are losing at the OMB, because they're not. Now, one other thing you said, a misapprehension, I suspect, is that the OMB is trying to be faithful to the growth plan. But you know that in Waterloo, the regional municipality had a growth plan that was faithful to, had an official plan that was congruent with the provincial growth plan, and the OMB screwed it up.
Well,
sorry, we need more information there. What do you mean?
They overruled Waterloo, and they allowed for the developers to have more sprawl, more encroachment, which goes against what the province and all of us at this table want.
Well, and I agree that the province doesn't want sprawl, but I think if you dig a little deeper into the facts of the Waterloo cases, I understand it. It was all about the kind of modeling that was used in determining how much land you needed for how much population. And you know where I put the blame in that one is on the province. The province did the growth plan and said you need to have X people and plan for X people, but they didn't say, and in calculating that, we think that you should be using the following model so that everyone could do the same thing. Why did they not do that? They would say it's because they want to leave a local option for a municipality. But when it is proven on the evidence, and again, there were planners and land use economists in front of the board, and the board had various bits of evidence that they had to weigh, it was determined that there had been an error in the modeling.
But Jane, we can all second guess the province and the OMB. I understand that, and no one's perfect. And the OMB is in the business of second guessing appeals. The problem is they look at things in isolation. And so we have this incrementalism, this creeping growth that we see right outside this studio again today, not 20 years ago when Ann Johnson's time, where Yonge Eglinton area is the nexus of growth in Toronto, and it's out of control because the OMB... Well, I think you'll see that the City of Toronto will say that the amount of out of control, not that it's not good to have growth in this node, in this area, but you got to have growth done in a coherent way. And when developers can just plop towers here, there, and everywhere without taking account of schools, sewage, infrastructure, and so on, then and that's what the City of Toronto is arguing for. The City of Toronto wants the growth here, but they want it in a coherent and manageable way. And the OMB looks in isolation at a decision, at an appeal by a developer, and doesn't look at what the planning department is necessarily trying to argue in terms of, hey, let's keep it at a reasonable pace, and they create a new floor for development that then the next developer says, hey, he got 42 stories, I want 44, 45, etc.
Tom.
You know, that goes back to the whole problem that when you talk about the Waterloo issue is we've taken the provincial policy, we've adhered to it in developing our official plan. We've identified the areas that we want to intensify in within our community. In Aurora, we've identified the province has said you're going to take this many people within so many years, and this is what we have to have. And so we've identified along Yonge Street in our downtown core, this is where we want to intensify. That plan gets approved by the province. And then we have the development community. They come in, and what they say is, well, we have an application over here on the southern end, and we want to double the density. And we should be allowed to do that because it meets the provincial policy statement.
But maybe not the local priority.
And so we turn around and we say, well, wait a sec. Now, we've identified this is the area we want to intensify. The province has approved the fact that this is what we want to do. And now you're asking for us to approve that. And we turn around, and for me, it's prove to me that this is an exceptional application for me to allow those exceptions to happen. And unless you prove that it's going to better the community, then we should be allowed, and it comes back to my whole point, that we should be allowed to uphold our plan.
There's a guy named Richard McFarlane who's with the Oriole Park Residents Association, which is right in this area here where we're speaking tonight, and he sent me an email last night on the issue of whether it's a fair fight when residents want to go to the OMB to challenge a development. And he says money talks at OMB hearings. It costs upwards of $20,000 a day to have a professional planner and lawyer represent the community. Obviously, if you're working on a multi-million-dollar development, 20 grand a day is within budget. Mike, if you're a residents association where you paid 10, 15 bucks a year to join, I mean, that's pretty much out of your league, isn't it?
I'd agree it's a challenge, and this is where I think that there can be improvements through reforms to the OMB. The OMB currently has something called a Citizen Liaison Office, and you may be shocked to find out that there is only one person at the Citizen Liaison Office for the entire province. So this is something that we think, the development community thinks that there could be vast improvements for the province to better resource the Citizen Liaison Office. It could act almost as a planning aid type of office whereby there are resources to communities, whether it's legal resources, planning resources, to provide them advice on the process. To ensure that communities understand the process, understand what they're getting into. I also think that the province and municipalities could do a better job in terms of communicating the growth plan, what it means. We spoke earlier about Yonge and Eglinton. Yonge and Eglinton is an urban growth center in the growth plan. This is a specific intersection that is targeted for significant growth. and the province is investing $5 billion in an LRT line to open up in a couple of years.
Yep.
So these are the exact locations where growth is coming. And as I said earlier, nobody likes change. It is a challenge. The former mayor of Burlington, Rob McIsaac, once said the only thing people hate more than sprawl is intensification. And this is where...
Okay, with a few minutes to go here, then let's put the ultimate question here on the table, which is the notion of trying to balance these competing interests. On the other hand, as Mike described, we've got hundreds of thousands of more people who are going to move into this area in the next several years. They need places to live. The residents who are already here don't necessarily want the character of their neighborhoods to change dramatically in order to accommodate that growth. The Ontario Municipal Board is often the last court of appeal on all of these things, and if we want to make that process better, what should we do? Jane, any ideas?
I think that it should be significantly better resourced than it is at the moment to allow folks who have an excellent career to give it up to become a board member with some certainty of continuity and support. I think the board is very disheartened and off balance at the moment. Next, there's some wonderful people working there, but they just don't have the supports they need.
How many judges are there altogether on the OMB?
Well, it comes and goes because they're 28 are permitted, and they were down to 17 folks who were actually available for hearings only 6 months ago.
And unlike a court, I mean, you don't have 10 people listening to a case at once or something. It's
one person.
One person. Right.
Yeah, some rarely two. But now they're part-time members. They've taken members who are from other tribunals that may not have the background in
So a little more
land use
foundation
planning.
would be good there.
More foundation, number one. Number two, and this is to the point I think we're trying to even up a little bit in the perception and making it feel more accessible to communities. I remember when one of the old-time chairs of the board, Mr. Kennedy, said OMB stands for Ombudsman. And the board 40 years ago took very seriously its role to make a decision in the public interest, and that included having board members ensure that members of the public who may have been unrepresented or didn't have the big budget planners and engineers and experts felt that they had a full and fair hearing. I think that needs to be reinstalled and reinstilled. And finally, I think that there could be an awful lot better job done by resourcing effectively a triage as appeals come in, things that could be readily settled if you could get people in a room for a day with experts around the table and an expert mediator. Others where you put a little more intensive effort to it. At the moment, the board does do mediation, but there are very few members who are capable of being spared from the hearing to do mediation. So you can wait months for one.
Councillor, less than 2 minutes to go.
Sure. I just think that it's time for bold reforms when it comes to the OMB.
Like what?
Bring back the authority to the local municipalities, give them the right to uphold their official plans. I think we can all agree on that if let's have that argument, let's have that fight at the official plan stage. Development community can argue what they're looking for, the province can argue what they're looking for, and the municipality can argue what they're looking for. We put it all together. Once it's approved by the province, development community knows what they can build, we know what we can allow. I think at the end of the day, everyone's happy.
Mike.
3 things.
No, Mike, I haven't got time for
okay.
3. Give me one.
More mediation, better resources for the Citizen Liaison Office, and it's outside the purview of the OMB, but I think we need to have more up-to-date municipal zoning and official plans. It's great Aurora's moving forward with that, but a lot of municipalities aren't.
Martin.
We have to recognize the OMB is rough justice. It can't be perfect, and so it's better to have 2 panelists instead of 1, because one person's more likely to mess things up. And I think they need to, as Jane would suggest, they need to bend over backwards to see the other side, because the other side, not the developer, is not going to be as well resourced. So you have to make allowance for that. The public interest, Jane and I actually agree, and I nominate her for the OMB.
If nominated, will you serve?
That would be entirely up to the Attorney General. That's who makes the appointment.
Let's get Yasser Naqvi on the phone right now. Attorney General, I have an idea. No, anyway. Thanks, everybody, for this. That's Martin Redcon from the Toronto Daily Star, as we called it back in the day. Tom Marakis, the Aurora Town Councillor. On the other side of the table, Jane Pepino, Airden Burles LLP, Mike Collins-Williams, Ontario Home Builders Association. I'm not sure, since we did that program on quantitative easing, whether we've had a show as nerdy a topic as this, but this was pretty good. All right, thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit TVO.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.